I think we can have all the panelists introduce themselves, because I think you guys will do a better job of that. And then we'll get started with a little game to break the ice at the beginning. All right?
Hi, I'm Chrissy Meyer. I'm a partner at Root Ventures. We are a seed stage VC firm that invests in hardware, automation, manufacturing, and enterprise software. So for my background, I studied electrical engineering, and then I spent, the better part of the last decade building teams and building products at places like Apple, Square, and some early stage startups.
Hi everyone, my name is Jennifer. I'm a software engineer and technical lead at Google, where I work on some early stage unreleased hardware projects.
I got this one. Hey everybody, how's everybody doing tonight? Good, awesome, good energy. First and foremost, I want to shout out my lovely family who's here. I have 3 little ones over there that came to surprise me, so say hi to them. My name is Alfred Jones. I run the mechanical engineering team at Lyft Level 5, which is our self-driving hardware division. So I make self-driving cars. I'm a product design guy. I've been, over the past couple of decades, designing products from as early as Motorola flip phone to things like Amazon and Fitbit.
Hi, I'm Kate McAndrew. I'm a venture capitalist at a fund called Bolt. It's an $82 million fund, and we are really focused on very, very early companies, usually kind of people in markets, not yet products and teams, at the intersection of the physical world and the digital world. So really excited about software leaping off the screen and into the world around us. Thanks, Majenta, for having us.
Hi, I'm Kwabena Agyeman. Let's see. I run this small company called OpenMV in my free time, where we sell this thing called OpenMV Chem. It's a little computer vision module that's about yay big. Anyway, and then during the day, I just work at a self-driving truck startup called Embark Trucks. Yep.
So yeah, and I'm Beau, and we're at Kickstarter doing outreach. So I work a lot with design and technology projects and help with their campaign and direction, and also big fan of PCB and electronic design, mentoring on the prize this year. So if anybody has questions about prototyping and development, would love to talk as well.
Awesome. And I'm just going to mention that the prize is really open to all stages of people in the product development process. So you may notice we obviously have a very dynamic range of perspectives on the panel tonight, which I'm really excited about. And we also want to have sort of a conversation across all those topics that might be involved, whether it's funding or prototyping or design for manufacture. So you'll see sort of the questions go through some of those things. All right, so to get started, we're just going to do a little true or false about some of the statements you might hear in the industry or the startup world or hardware, software conversations. So first off, hardware is the new software. True or false? False, 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 false. Beau, you got to say why you think it's true.
I do more hardware than software now, so I'm going to say it's all about the hardware. But
okay.
Thing I hear more, it's all about both.
Okay, all about both. Can anyone elaborate why sort of it's got to be about both, or why you think people may claim that hardware is the new software?
False promises?
I think people think that the speed of iteration is improving with hardware, and it is getting faster and faster to rapid prototype as it is in software, but the speed to scale is like not there yet. It is not the new software in that respect. Hardware is hard.
+1 on that one. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Next, if you have an idea for a product, you need to keep it a secret until it goes to market. True or false? False, false, false. Unanimous. Oh, well, this isn't as polarizing as I was hoping it might be. That's all right. Why is it good to share your product, and what stage would you say it's best to start sharing your idea?
I would say that unless you're dealing in trade secrets, it is great to share early and often, ask questions, get feedback. Ideas are not valuable, execution is valuable. So don't worry about the idea, focus on connecting with people who can help you make it real.
Kwabena?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so generally no one cares about what you're thinking about. That's
Not
the
as much
standard.
as you do, right?
Yeah, no one cares. Anyway, so for OpenMV, actually, we kind of started our project on Hackaday, and we managed to successfully fund ourselves through Kickstarter by just having a large Hackaday following and having a lot of skulls and just basically getting a bunch of people who had viewed our webpage and kind of able to drive all that traffic to our Kickstarter page in order to get our project off the ground.
There can be a huge advantage to being open source early on, right?
Just a cautionary tale on that. So my last startup was a company called Pearl Automation, and we were building vehicle technology products. And our company was a team of a bunch of former Apple engineers, and I feel like at Apple, you are bred secrecy. Like, everything is all about the secrecy. It's like you don't tell people what you're working on, even if they sit in the office next to you. So we came into the company with the same approach. It's like you keep your product stealthy until you're ready to launch. And we ended up building a product that was way too expensive and that didn't resonate with a large portion of the market. And I think it really goes back to Kate's comment of we weren't talking to potential customers early and we weren't talking to them often. So by the time we realized there wasn't product market fit, we had run out of runway. We didn't have much cash left. So I'm a huge believer that there's very little risk to getting out there and talking to people about your product idea as early as you possibly can while there's still plenty of room to pivot.
I'll also add one nuance to that. I think there's a really big difference between talking to customers and doing press. I think until you've launched a product, press is typically a distraction. Obviously, it depends on what you're working on. But there's a difference between feedback and putting your time and energy into press.
That's a good clarification, thanks. All right, additive manufacturing has fulfilled its promise. True or false? Wah. Oh! I was going to say wah,
All right,
wah.
Claude,
All right,
this.
you got to defend your statement.
I might be thinking about it from a different level everyone else is. I just do electrical stuff, so...
Well, I think
Okay,
that's a valid
so, I mean-
perspective. Yeah, let's hear it.
Sorry, I just do like cheap boards, so I mean, being able to 3D print things is great. It's been really helpful. We're able to do that, but I wouldn't say that's like met its promise or anything like robust per se. Yes, anyone else?
Yeah, I will say, I think when 3D printing first came out, we were all like, oh, wow, this is going to speed up manufacturing. But the reality is it's not scalable. It takes very long. There's very few material choices depending on what your application is. And it is not as fast as good old injection molding or CNCing or casting, depending on what you need. So I would say false. It is not fulfilled its promise to me.
All righty.
I'll also say maybe the promise was too hyped because it's pretty awesome, right? Like it is pretty awesome. It has come a long way. It has changed prototyping. We do have more resins that can become functional parts. Like I think additive manufacturing is amazing, but the hype cycle around it was so big that I think there was a lot of misalignment between the reality of the technology and what people were promising. So maybe it's the problem of the hype, not the tech.
Yeah, definitely a lot of hype there. But on the prototyping side, it's definitely, there's definitely still a lot of promise there, and it has delivered on a lot of that. I mean, I just backed a small electronics project, and I'm going to get a circuit board shipped to me in a STL file to print my own case. And that's not something that's going to scale to millions, but it's great for hobbyists and tinkers and development. So there's definitely a place for it, but there's still a lot of promise to be fulfilled in the production scale.
It's amazing from that standpoint. Yes, and that's why I was saying about scalability, right? If you were going to scale to hundreds, millions, depending, it's going to be very challenging there. But from a prototyping, that has done wonders, right? Days where it's like we would have to spend thousands of dollars just to get a sample of something in our hands. Now we could quickly do it. So that is a huge benefit to it. So I'm glad we clarified that there. But still not the promise.
Yeah, I also want to echo that. So 3D printing isn't super awesome when you're trying to scale. It's incredibly useful for every prototyper should have it in their toolkit. But at the same time, your iterations are still on the order of days. And for me, I'm from a software background. And if my code is taking days to compile, I'm not having a fun time.
So what are the expectations that we've been let down on?
Full-scale mass manufacturing off of additive manufacturing, right? So basically, you would be able to say, okay, now let's go make 10,000 of these tomorrow because it's so quick to make one. Reality is it's not. Yeah,
Yeah.
in place to that, but it doesn't.
Yeah, you don't have to drive all the way to the Target store. You just go home and hit print.
Yes, exactly.
I also think I think there was a promise that it would be really user friendly and that like any kid could have a 3D printer and a computer in their house and like design and make their own toys like same day. And the truth is that like stuff's really finicky and it's still pretty hard to use. So I think the other promise was that it would be really either like super robust or super simple. And the truth is it's like kind of complicated and good for really specific applications, but not, broadly applicable in the way that people were talking about.
I'd also like to add my $200 mono-price 3D printer does not fulfill its promise. I think I spend more time cursing at it than I actually do printing stuff.
All right, on that note, we'll get to our final true or false. And this one I'll sort of caveat out there. I know this can get very political, but I think we can focus on a lot of different perspectives here. And also just maybe why or why not it's a good idea or not. All manufacturing should be domestic. True or false? Nice. We finally got a little back and forth.
Because I knew everybody was going to say false.
Okay.
No, I think whatever is necessary, right? Of course, it'd be great if we can manufacture as much in the U.S. from the political side, jobs, right? But it's whatever your product intent needs. There's opportunities that are much faster, much cheaper if you go overseas, depending where you go. So no, my real answer is false.
Okay. Beau had a true as well, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thinking about supply chain is a big factor. Like I personally, we had to buy some camera modules, and we bought them from Aero, and Aero was like, yeah, we're going to deliver that in 3 months, and then it was 5 months, and then it was 7 months, and they eventually got around to shipping 2,500, which is not a huge amount, but we moved to our production to China, and we have a contact who just like magically gets these things. Like, we ask about how long is the lead time on the cameras, and it's like, oh, we already got them. I mean, I don't know how it happens, but it's definitely made a huge difference on thinking about when we deploy capital to start a production run, and yeah.
Yeah, I look at it more in terms of local manufacturing. So clearly now it's not true, but how should it be? It would be great if all of the resources were equally distributed and you could have things more closely sourced, and like the movement with food and all of that is get it local. So clearly we're not there now, but for me in an optimistic future, that's how it would go.
I'll throw out, I think it would be great if all manufacturing and supply chains were more sustainable and were more equitable from a labor perspective. So I think rather than shooting for national boundaries as being the goal, shooting for sustainability and equitable labor practices, regardless of where things are produced, would be my dream.
Yes, I support that.
And I think that as automation starts to creep in across more and more like manufacturing areas, I think it's going to start to make sense to have more local manufacturing, like closer to the source manufacturing sites. So I really do look forward to that future, but I think that it's a really long way off. And I think until every portion of your supply chain exists domestically or in places around the world, it's always going to be far simpler to get something built in Shenzhen when I can run to the spot market and pick up whatever camera module I need on the spot. So I think, eventually we're starting to see a shift towards more onshoring and nearshoring, and I am excited about that future, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. I think that went well. All right. So we'll get started with sort of the meat of the night. Kate and Chrissy, I wanted to ask, we sort of went over this a little bit, that ideas are sort of cheap, right? And there's a lot of products and projects that people are working on and getting products to market is becoming easier and more accessible every day. How do you recognize something that's going to be competitive and successful early on? You guys are looking at concept stage products and teams. What are some of the characteristics you look for to see that something is going to be the one?
I think there's a few different perspectives you can take when answering this question. And the first one is from a VC perspective. There's a lot of things that we like to see that kind of makes a product idea stand out. One is that it's technically defensible, that it's really hard to replicate. One is that the team is outstanding and that they're deeply technical and that they can actually pull it off and execute. One is that it's a novel application of a technology, that it's a huge market, a huge market, and an underserved industry. So like these are all things that are checkboxes that I think a lot of VCs in our space really want to see in order for our product idea to kind of like rise above the crowd and really stand out. But then like there's another perspective of like looking at it from the standpoint of just like consumer electronics. It's not enough to have a killer product idea. Like I really wish, like the engineer in me like wishes it was enough to have some just really cool technology or really cool product. But the reality of the situation is today in consumer electronics, you can't just, it really is all about marketing, and it's all about branding and distribution strategy. So those are the things that I think a lot of creators and a lot of people that are starting companies have to start thinking about super early. And I think that is what makes products and companies stand out more than anything else in the consumer electronics world.
Yeah, I think that oftentimes I can kind of bucket companies or people that I'm talking to into two buckets. Are you pitching me a product or are you pitching me a company? Right? Like as an investor, you're selling me shares in your business, not your product. I am not a consumer of your product. I'm a consumer of shares in your business. And I feel like oftentimes great founders have the ability to tell the compelling story of the company that's inclusive of a product. And oftentimes, especially for consumer, I want to be able to dream of what's the second, third, fourth product that could come after that. How does it go from being a single product to a category owner, right? Does it have the ability to become an only, right? That's a question I like to ask. Like, if this works, could this be the only company? If you go, you kind of like, you can do it, you're the best at it, you're the only one. Like that's not all companies in our portfolio can be onlys, but like that's a question we like to ask. So yeah, I think everything that Chrissy said is totally right. I'll add a little bit like company versus product.
So I want to follow on that a bit and where we started with how secret or when do you share things, but particularly on that vein of differentiating building a company in a startup versus being focused on a product. Does anybody want to talk about like where do you make that transition? How do you think about I have this idea, I'm intent and invested in seeing it through, but to me at some point there's a shift where you go from focusing on this idea to focusing on the infrastructure and the growth of a company. Do you all see that as one and the same thing, or do you think there's a break point where you get to a proof of concept or minimum viable product?
Most of the founders that I see that are very successful start out thinking about the company and start out thinking about like the long-term vision and what the full product roadmap is going to be and what their pricing model and financial strategy is going to be. So I think it's more often than not when we see people that are massively successful, they start with the huge vision. And then sometimes it even takes effort to like wrangle them down to, okay, what is your first product? Like what is really an MVP to get a first product out the door and into customers' hands rather than the bottoms up approach of like, here's my first product, then what?
Yeah, I think the other thing too is like, I think to your point, it's like starting there, but then having the rigor to focus on executing what's in front of you, right? While holding the vision of what the company's trying to achieve. And But I do think there's a lot of value in focusing on building early prototypes, giving them to customers, getting feedback, making another 10, giving them to 10 more customers. Like that kind of execution and like rigor around product is really important, but it's typically held within a larger company vision from day one.
So we mentioned a little bit about additive manufacturing. There's a lot of really awesome, accessible prototyping tools out there, from 3D printers, laser cutters, CNC machines. I wanted to ask Kwabena, Alfred, and Jennifer, what are sort of your like weapon of choice when you're trying to get a proof of concept? Maybe as quickly as possible. Maybe you can talk about if you go for quality or that sort of thing. What do you like to work with?
Well,
best?
proof of concept, quick and dirty. And all the things that you mentioned, yes, yes, and yes. However, one of the things that you didn't mention that I think is super helpful is 3D CAD, FEA, finite element analysis, modal analysis, what have you, thermal analysis, depending on what problem you're trying to solve. That will rapidly speed up your iteration process so you can actually get to something that is a little more fundamental and more well thought out from an assembly standpoint, maybe from a structural standpoint. And then from there, I mean, it depends what you're looking for, right? If you're looking for form, fit, and finish, 3D printing all day. Let's go do that in parallel with doing a next iteration. If I'm looking for something structural, then I may send something out for a CNC. It all depends. But again, always start with your simulation tools because that will speed things up tremendously.
Yeah, so I don't really do a lot of 3D printing because I do board design stuff. Let's see, on the 3D printing front, it's just Formlabs or MakerBot. I'm simple.
Would you ever use the CNCs for circuit boards, or would you always order a test sample of something?
Oh yeah, no, it's just way easier to go to. I do Macrofab or like Sierra Circuits. It's just like I don't really want to have like a lot of equipment that I have to take care of at my place. So just like getting it built, getting the parts back to me as quickly as possible, and then testing it, and then making sure you do a good job up front, so you don't like do a second round is the big thing for me.
On the software side of things, I think that if I start dabbling in like the mechanical side of things, I try to use what I know, which is mostly laser cutting. And then when I'm prototyping with software, I always try to use what I know, like microcontrollers that I'm familiar with. I think when you're trying to prototype very quickly, you need to be very careful when you're thinking about this hot new technology that everyone says is awesome. Generally, just stick with what you're very familiar with.
Great. So next question is, where do you think founders of startups just getting started should really invest their energy and money if they don't have the resources for a top-end designer or doing market analysis, finite resources, tight budgets? Where do you really focus that, and any tips and tricks for making the most out of very little?
Talk to customers. Talk to customers, and then talk to more customers. It's free, and it's the number one thing that that you should be doing because they have the answer. They can help you find that. So that's my answer.
I think in the early days, you should be spending all of your time on recruiting and all of your money on headcount. It's like the team that you build is your most valuable asset more than anything else. So I think that the more time and money that you put into building an awesome rock star team, like every great person you bring onto your team is like a force multiplier. And to answer the last part about like tips and tricks you can use, one of my favorite things to advise hardware startups in particular is like find a rock star factory. Like find a factory that's a really good fit. Because if you find like the perfect contract manufacturer, you can leverage that team. Like they'll give you engineering resources. They'll help you with a lot of aspects of your product design and development that you would struggle with or that you would pay outrageous sums of money to like external design firms to do. So if you can find a good fit on a contract manufacturer side, like leverage the heck out of that.
I would like to echo that. Yeah, we have a contract manufacturer who just like they have great prices for all the design services. Like, in fact, we'll just like suggest we need this thing, and then they'll just figure it out. And then like, the PO is not very large after that. They'll just, because they just want to like get the production volume. They don't really care about charging us per se on the design costs.
I think to double down on one of Chrissy's points too around team is a lot of people, I think there's a misconception like, oh, if I just hit X milestone with my product, then my company is going to be more valuable. But the value, and I'm talking about from an investment perspective, the value of an additional team member that's awesome, that has a great track record, that people believe can execute is much more powerful than, or is a force multiplier, as she said, as opposed to like that kind of next incremental product milestone.
And so you've got the team, you've got the factory. How do you know when your product's ready to take to market? And you know, you can iterate and revise forever, but at some point you got to press go. What are the key indicators to move on to actually launch?
I think it really depends on your product, and it depends on. Are we talking consumer products?
Let's say we're talking consumer products.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the expectations of your category and the dynamics of your category. But generally speaking, we always love to see people do kind of an iterative beta process where you've had groups of customers using the product and giving you feedback for some meaningful amount of time, so that you feel like you have a sense of their behavior, how things are going to break and why. You've gone through all those healthy product development cycles to iterate until you feel strongly about it. And then everything else about the company is aligned with product to be ready to launch, right? So you feel like that you can, you've got a customer acquisition strategy and you have the budget to, drive people to your website or wherever you're planning to sell your early units. But I think iterative beta is something that we love to see.
I think there's one thing that is a little bit cliche, but you hear a lot, which is that like if you feel like you're ready to ship, you've waited too long. And I think there's some truth to that. Like shipping product should always feel uncomfortable. Like you should always be nervous, like slightly nervous to get your product out into the field and see how people react to it. And you don't want to be too conservative and waiting too long, because that can kill a company if you're a hardware startup. But then like there's another piece to that, which is like, in my mind, what is the bare minimum? Like the bare minimum bar for being able to ship a product out into the field? And one is just functionality. Like, does the thing do what it's supposed to do? Like, it doesn't have to be fully featured, because now with like software updates and over-the-air, updates, you can add features and functionality later. But like, whatever that MVP is and that core functionality and that core experience that we want our product to have, does it have that? Does it do that? And then the second piece of that is I better be super confident that I'm not going to have like catastrophic field failures. Because it's part of the iterative process. You should be testing and validating the heck out of your product so that you have a pretty high degree of confidence when you ship that you're not going to get 75% return rate in the first month, because that will kill you as well.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So what are some of the biggest bottlenecks in design for manufacture, and how can you maybe anticipate those or try to avoid them, or just plan to count that time in?
So generally, from just design from a manufacturer standpoint, your two biggest bottlenecks are going to be your lead time to procurement. Whether it be if you're procuring materials for resources, and just when you say go make something, to when it's available in the factory for assembly, that's going to be your longest bottleneck. In my experience, some of the tricks of the trade that you can use there are kind of staggering what you release. Looking at something, seeing if it's just ready enough, taking a risk, and saying, okay, well, what are the different failures that may occur if we release now, as opposed to waiting for that verification data? When you said, wait and verify, yes, you need to do that, but you also have to sometimes take that risk. And then I would add the verification process is always longer than you expect. if you want to be thorough. So you're always going to have to look at that data and think to yourself, okay, what is the most reasonable field failure rate that I can expect if I make a decision to go now, right? So it's those twofold: the actual manufacturing of it, and then the verification of it after.
There's also one bottleneck that I've run into many times, which is just shitty suppliers, right? Like, you pick shitty suppliers and like they take a long time to respond to you. And when they do respond, you can't trust their responses. They say, yeah, like, of course I can meet tolerance, whatever. Yeah. And then it turns out they can't come anywhere close. So spend the time and effort to pick a good supply chain and you'll eliminate a lot of the bottlenecks that you'll run into during DFM.
You said the word that I was just thinking. Always request DFM. A lot of times, most of my roles have been in larger companies. I have been in a couple of startups, but it's all the same. A lot of time we want to just trust a supplier, trust a vendor, and just go. But always request DFM. Look at how they're manufacturing it. Try to understand what you're getting, because that may be indicators of potential failures you may get, potential bottlenecks from a supply chain or for delivery or for a shipment standpoint. So DFM is your friend. It rhymes for a reason. I just made that up, dad joke.
And just to add to that, like, if you can afford it, go visit them on site during the DFM phase. Like, you can look at those injection molding machines and tell if they haven't been maintained in 20 years. So if you get the chance and if you can afford to fly to wherever it is your suppliers are, like, by all means, do it.
Here's another one. Have a manufacturing and processing friend or expert to help you along the way. As you design something, it may not be as obvious when you're trying to design for manufacturability, right? If you're going to design something for molding versus designing something for 3D printing or CNC, it's completely different. And it could be challenging depending how complex that is. So if you're able to have an expert kind of, double check your work, give you some advice, coach you along the way, or just kind of take it over from there, that is another way to reduce time. Because you don't want to necessarily just depend on the supplier that's going to say, oh yeah, I can make that, and then they just make it some way that is super complex, overly expensive, takes very long, right? Because you want to minimize time, minimize costs, and get it in-house as quickly as possible so you can learn from it.
Yeah, +1 to that. Those people are gold.
Yeah, +2 to that.
True. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about money. So there's a lot of ways now that early stage or founders, creators, engineers can get projects funded. And I've heard a lot of stories of different ways they're combining methods and platforms and things like that. So I wanted to hear maybe some anecdotes of combining these methods successfully and unsuccessfully, whether they're your own or companies you've heard of or worked with.
Yeah, well, I'll kick it off from the crowdfunding side, in that some of the best successes that I see are in repeat creators and kind of going to the point of starting off smaller and really testing your product. So going out there and really producing a simpler version of the project, targeting it more at developers and early adopters, and then following that up with more and more mature products with larger and larger scale. We've definitely seen that in previous years where the follow-ons have been through more traditional capital. I think obviously the venture scene has changed a bit there, and curious to get some perspectives on where they see that. What I hear is crowdfunding is still a great resource in terms of helping identify the market and really dialing in your messaging, but that follow-on piece for scale is still definitely a challenge.
So we've definitely had some companies in our portfolio that have been successful in starting with a crowdfunding campaign and demonstrating traction and success there. The thing I would caution, though, is when it comes to crowdfunding, like, you can't just put your product out there and assume that, the number of backers equals success or failure. It really does take time and money. You really have to put time and money into making a crowdfunding campaign a success. So we've seen it go well, we've seen it not go well. Other avenues of funding, like grants, I see a lot of companies these days that are trying to get SBIR grants and get DoD or DOE grants, like government grants that are free money effectively, like non-dilutive funding. It's like I get money and I don't have to give up any percentage of my company. And a lot of people will do that first or do that during raising dilutive venture capital and have a lot of success there. And then there's one other slightly atypical thing that I see sometimes, which is I've seen some companies fund their product development by basically being work for hire, like having some consulting arm or spending some percentage of their time doing like consulting for other companies and other projects. And I've seen some companies be fairly successful that way, but VCs hate it, like hate it with a passion. Because it's not scalable. Like you can't grow a huge company if you're hindered by this, large percentage of them doing consulting gigs for other companies. So it's like VCs want to see you spend all your money and all your effort and all your resources building the product and the company that's going to grow the fastest.
Yeah. I feel like there's so much. There's a lot of money in the asset class right now, in venture capital right now. There's a lot of angel investors, and there's also a lot of alternatives, right? There's other places you can raise funds or pre-sell things, and I think oftentimes we're trying to think about, we're looking for founders that are thinking about like, how do I bring the best people around this company and give myself the best shot for what I want to build? And they're really different journeys depending on what your goals are. I think if you want to like launch a really cool product and like sell it to people and make them really happy with something awesome that they didn't know that they wanted or needed, I think crowdfunding can be a great opportunity. And it's not necessarily a fit for VC. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I feel like for a lot of the folks that we back that have, we're looking for people that have this aspiration to go on, I hate that, I'm not going to say rocket ship because it's just terrible, but they have an aspiration to build a multi-$100 million revenue business, and that's like a really particular aspiration, and it takes a very particular type of person and market and product and all of this stuff. And so I think for people trying to go for the venture scale opportunity, try and find people to bring around you that have been on that journey, and oftentimes that's VCs, right? And so it's less about where the money comes from, or is it, and more about the people that come with the money. So try and find value-added investors, whether they're angel investors or they're professional investors that can kind of help you get to the next step. So I do feel like, unfortunately, one of the things that we saw happen in the ecosystem was there was a little bit of a mixing of kind of the hobbyists and crowdfunding and venture investing, and that led to some confusion about, well, what kind of company is this? And we saw some things get overfunded or not ship or what have you. And so I do think VCs are reticent to fund things that have been crowdfunded today, because there's a little bit of a negative signal there. And that may change. But it also doesn't mean that crowdfunding is bad. It just might be different. So that's kind of my honest opinion.
So I wanted to say on the contracting route, I met a lot of people who have done that, and they're very negative about their experiences doing that kind of situation where you have to do a Kickstarter and then also do crowdfunding, and I would not recommend that. Sorry, with the doing the contracting work, because you'll end up spending all your time on the contracting side and not your own product. It's different if the product already works, but if the product doesn't work yet and you haven't shipped it, then it's a whole different ballgame, because you don't have that income source coming in for free anymore. You have to get that working first. Second, for my company, I've just been bootstrapping it, which has been fun. So I'm not in particular hurry to go anywhere. It's just something I do in my free time. But it seems to be growing exponentially just because we did an open source design, people started cloning it, then contracting opportunities started appearing randomly, and just other various things, and now it's just a lot of email.
I have a couple other creative things. So one is payment terms right? Like things like payment terms, they're not necessarily to get started, but payment terms with your factory can make a really big difference in your cash flow. So thinking about how can you get leverage there. And the other is, some factories will invest in companies, right? You don't want to take too much money from your factory. That can be a little bit dangerous, but we have seen factories put $100K into a seed round, and sometimes that can be a way to get started if you don't have other capital to kind of make that first inventory buy. So that's another creative option.
Yeah, and sometimes factories won't directly invest in your company, but they'll waive a huge portion of the NRE, the non-recurring engineering fees, to actually get a project shipped and out the door. So they'll provide a lot of engineering design services, and they'll provide a lot of, really relatively cheap labor in order to actually get your product designed and shipped.
Oh, about the factories, yeah. Generally the terms for those are pretty good. So your manufacturing run doesn't cost up front as much as you think. Generally it's less than 50% upfront down payment to get it started. Of course the money's due still, but in the time between when you make the down payment and then you actually ship the product, there's time to raise more capital or et cetera.
Yeah, and I think to add to that point, what you pay is often less important than when you pay. So if you're going into a negotiation with a factory, focus on payment terms. It's all about cash flow. So I would far prefer to get an extra 30 days or 60 days on payment terms rather than pay $1 cheaper or $2 less for my product.
Great. I want to come back to the design for manufacturing for a minute, and Alfred and Kwabena, maybe you can speak to this in terms of any suggestions on how to prioritize that effort. Particularly around budget, time, quality, and scale. So any major tracks between looking at, say, optimizing for tens, hundreds versus thousands, tens of thousands? Do you find there's a different mindset there, or what are the keys to staying focused?
You can go first.
All right. Thank you. Quality, scale, budget, time. These are all variables. You only get one. Basically, how do we manage for that? It always depends, right? The reason why I say you always get one is because you have to think about what is the most important thing to your product. Do we need to get it on time? Well, you may have to pay a lot of more money for it and reduce your quality. Must you have absolutely the best quality ever? It may take a long time for you to get there. So these are different things that you have to think about, and it depends on what your need. Ultimately, the answer to your question is, from my perspective, it depends on what your need is, right? And you have to look at all the different variables and figure out, based off your need, which ones are you willing to trade off for in order to move faster.
Okay, so we previously had a question about when should you ship your product, and so one thing that worked really well for us that kind of ties into design for manufacturing is our first OpenMV cam was a burning trash fire, but we had a really good firmware updater that was built into it, so you could never brick the device, and we made sure everyone could get the firmware updates. And so that let us go really fast on shipping a product that was lightly tested and various other problems, and kind of allowed us to survive. And that kind of ties in a little bit into your product being designed. You should have some way, if it's electronic at least, for you to 100% guarantee all your customers can get their problems solved quickly, allowing you to build this product faster and get out the door faster. For mechanical design aspects, I can't really comment on that, just because we just ship a pure PCB board product effectively. But on testing apparatus kind of approach, I always recommend to have some kind of serial number embedded in your devices. It really helps deal with the, at least for us, we're getting cloned pretty hard in China right now. There's about 5 different cloners. We actually work with one because we had to basically make our own Chinese branch. But they're not our Chinese branch. They're a cloner that we are now... We're in a revenue sharing agreement with them, but we were able to get that though because we have a software on our we distribute desktop software that license checks the cameras and compares them to a database we run of all of our products that we built, and this kind of helps keep the clone people who buy clone modules from us. They don't email us for tech support because the IDE tells them that they built a fake unit or something. But having the foresight to make sure that we have a hardware accessible unique serial number that's on every unit that we can actually check has been really helpful. Just for various reasons, for like help support claims or whatever, it just makes a huge difference.
What do you guys prioritize at Lyft?
Quality. Always quality first.
Nice. So we talked a little bit about sharing ideas early and often. When if ever, is there a time to protect your ideas legally, whether that be investing in a patent or whatnot? Is it ever worth it? And why? How do you know?
Yeah, totally. I think it really depends on the company, and you always want to patent real things, not ideas. But I think having a strategic and pragmatic patent attorney on your side can be really good. Oftentimes, patents are used, yes, to protect your design, but also to kind of build strategic value or moats within the company. And they can become assets when you start to think about acquisitions, or someone comes after you and maybe you've got a patent that you want to trade with them. And so they're assets beyond just making people not make stuff that looks like your stuff. But I think like the best thing you can do is find a great pragmatic patent attorney. And if you're building something that's hardware related, finding one that has experience with hardware products is really important. I'll give a plug for Peter from Run 8 Patent Group. He's like a favorite of, I think, hardware investors in the Valley. He's amazing. He's super accessible, very pragmatic, understands when to spend, when to hold back.
His talk at the Bolt conference is what inspired that question.
Oh,
so,
great. Yeah. So refer to Peter.
I'm going to take a slightly different viewpoint, which is that if you're like really in the early stages of your product and company, don't worry about IP. Like, you really shouldn't be spending a tremendous amount of time and effort and money on protecting your idea. Because I think there's this concept of technical defensibility, right? If your product is so easy to copy, like, it might not be worth doing in the first place. And the second piece of that is that patents are only as good as they are enforceable. Like, if you don't have the money to go out and spend a tremendous amount of money on legal fees to go out and enforce your patents, then like, what good are they really? So I think there is a point that it does make sense to have a patent strategy and to go out and start pursuing some key patents around some of your core technology aspects. But in the early days, it really shouldn't be anything that you're spending a tremendous amount of time and money on.
Okay, so back to my cloners. What set off like this whole ridiculous, funny story was I applied for a trademark for our logo. And when I did that, then Baidu, it's AliExpress or one of the shops in China. The second you have a trademark, they go and find everybody who's selling the same stuff as you and shut their web stores down. And then when that happened, then I started getting emails from folks about they wanted to work with us to be licensed. So then they needed to have a paperwork from me with my signature on it that said, they're an official store of OpenMV, and that was just me applying for a trademark. Wasn't a patent, but we've had some deals now come through that would be a lot more lucrative if we had some protection with a patent versus since we open sourced everything we did. We have no real way to do anything but contracting work with people right now. We can't actually. If someone wants to manufacture at a scale larger than us and is willing to do that, we don't have a way to kind of pull profit out of that. We have to just agree with whatever terms we're given, kind of. So it would be nice to have like a patent to kind of make a more lucrative deal for myself, but whatever the case, life is good.
So I think we're just about time. So for the last question, I want to ask more of a fun one. So all of this is a ton to juggle. Obviously, we've talked through a million different things and can be overwhelming, even just one phase of the product development process or entrepreneurial process. Do you guys have any favorite life hacks for tackling tackling all the priorities?
Exercise. My hair is wet because I came from the gym. No, seriously, exercise. It's like
Balance.
makes you happy, keeps your body healthy, makes you not fly off the handle. Take care of yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that, like, find a good coach and find a good therapist. And then also surround yourself by other founders and other people who have been through what you've been through. I mean, at Root, we like to host a lot of events for our founders to get together and socialize and network, because every time they do, they learn from each other. And every time they do, they bounce ideas off of each other. And I think it helps keep you sane and it helps keep you grounded.
If you work hard, play hard. Sometimes you have to just step back and take everything in, just to enjoy it and realize what you have. Do something fun. Do something enjoyable. Do something other than work. Those are all the different things that I do to stay focused, balanced.
Yeah, jumping off of that, take the time to invest in establishing a really good team culture. Like, do fun things with your team together, because it's going to be a lot more fun to work if you like each other.
Do something other than work. Yeah. Like, far removed from tech, like as much as possible, so that you can come back kind of refreshed and not thinking about or surrounded by that in that environment all day long, just so you can kind of get a reset button hit every week or something.
Yeah, and all of the above, and really focus on finding people that you enjoy being around. I mean, if you're really into what you love doing, you're going to find yourself working a lot with people intensely. So people that have positive attitudes and support you and bring you up rather than you have to fight with. You should really enjoy the people that you're around and what you're doing. And also, I find really being creative and opportunistic. Like, when you're working a lot, I find myself traveling a lot. I don't have the time to go on vacation and go all these places, but if I'm already there, find a great restaurant, make some friends, go to a museum, do something interesting. Take advantage of those spare moments that you have when you find yourself in unique places.
I want to reiterate the find your community. If you like making things and hacking things and being an engineer or inventor, all of the above, please check out Hackaday.io, because it's a great place to find community as well. So with that, I want to open it up to the audience for any Q&A you guys might have for our panelists. Yes. I think, do we want to do with Mike, or you think? Okay, go ahead and I'll repeat your question.
So a lot of the investors are staying well away from hardware, and possibly even well away from early stage. And you're doing both early stage and hardware. And I'm just wondering, like, what's your thought process that says this is a great place for us to be, or why it is that you're going into that area?
So what's your thought process when it comes to doing investing in early stage, concept stage hardware, when it seems like all arrows are pointing away from that?
Hardware in particular. It's like, I don't want to touch hardware. It's all about the data.
Yeah, I think, honestly, I see it as a huge opportunity. Like, at Root, I think the venture landscape today, there's more and more capital. There's more and more people out raising funds. Like, rounds are getting larger and larger. And for founders, that's great. But for us, like, the fact that we are hardware investors and we deeply understand hardware and we deeply understand manufacturing, it's something that we can use to kind of set ourselves apart from the crowd. And we see it as an underserved opportunity. It's a place for us to go in and find really amazing companies and really amazing founders, and then also just like roll up our sleeves and tap into like our deep background in hardware and manufacturing and actually help out. And in the earliest days, when our companies are only 2 people or 3 people or 5 people, you can't hire every role. So like, I've gone in there and I've helped our portfolio companies negotiate a contract with a CM and chart out a development schedule and figure out a hiring plan to de-risk some of their biggest technical challenges. It's like being able to like go in and actually add value to increase that company's chance of success.
I'm not sure I really think of us as really a hardware investor. I really do believe that the lines between the physical world and software are going to continue to blur. I think that will happen in the enterprise. I think it will happen with consumer products. And I think that we think a lot more about kind of demand trends that are going on, both in the enterprise and in consumer. And we're not afraid of hardware. And we're deeply educated and committed to it. And I mean, Bolt's been around for 7 years, 6.5 years. So I think that one of the things that happened was we saw a few years ago, we saw a really big spike in hype around hardware, and there were a lot of people that didn't come out of hardware. They were traditionally software investors dipping their toes into hardware, and they got bitten because they didn't really know what they were doing, to be honest. And I think it's really valuable to invest in places where you have deep subject matter expertise and to find investors who have subject matter expertise in what you are doing. I think there is plenty of market cap to be built in hardware, and I think for us, early stage is not only the biggest opportunity in venture because it's the least represented compared to the whole asset class, it's also the most fun. Like, we get to dream with the founders. We get to help build the core team that's going to build the culture that's going to build the company. Like, it's awesome. And I think that there's no other part of that. I don't want to be a spreadsheet monkey. Like, that's not interesting. So for me personally, and I think for my team at Bolt, there's no other stage we would want to invest at. Maybe we would eventually, but for now, like, that's the core of what we love, is in the building.
So I think an interesting question as a hardware/software company is you talk about stages, and so like what for the VCs do you qualify as pre-seed versus seed versus, and then can you align that with what's your expectation around traction, and because it's just all over the map, and so especially when you're a hardware company, so are you looking for pilots, are you looking for full-fledged installations? And I'm in the B2B market.
So can you define the different stages for hardware in the B2B market specifically and the traction alongside those? Okay.
Sure. So I think it's really squishy, right? And these words are like, people use them in different ways, and so it's always good to just clarify. I think if anyone is saying pre-seed, there's no expectation. I don't think there's an expectation that you have a product or that you have customers. You're presumed to be kind of pre-product, pre-revenue. Maybe you have a prototype. And I think pre-seed, I typically associate with rounds or capital in under $1 million. So it's like some number of hundreds of thousands of dollars that you're going to use to kind of bring a person or a couple people around you to get those early proof points to then go raise a larger institutional round. Seed, I think of as mostly $1 million. Seed rounds, I'm going to go with averages, but like seed rounds can get crazy, but like $1 million to $3 million, sometimes $4 million, is kind of like the seed bucket. And I think for that, it wildly depends on your category. But for B2B, if you have the ability to have a couple of customers that are using your product, if you're doing connected hardware, that hardware is feeding, data, they're paying you SaaS revenue, you've got an understanding of why they love you, and you've got a sense of the next customers that you're going to go get. Right? So you've probably got a little bit of traction. It might be unpaid pilots, just depends on the kind of industry that you're in. And then when you're getting into Series A or large seed, depending on the path that you took, Series A can be anywhere from $4 million to 25. I don't know. There are always things that break the rules, right? But let's say $4 million to 10 million or 15 million. And typically to unlock a Series A, you've got about at least $1 million in revenue. There's a sense that you've got kind of a repeatable customer acquisition funnel or sales strategy. And there's an indication that you can put more money in the top of this funnel and multiples of that money are going to come out the bottom, right? There's something steady about the business that merits heavy investment. Now, that all goes out the window when you're talking about things like aerospace, or like machine-human interfaces, or it's very category dependent, and investors behave differently in those categories because they require different amounts of capital in order to unlock milestones. So backing off of what I said, that was kind of like a generic connected hardware B2B example. I would say generally pre-seed means like founders and market. Seed means product and team. Series A means some sort of meaningful thing de-risked and the ability to know that you're building the right thing and you can keep doing it. And then Series B and beyond is growth.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so at Root, we mostly write seed checks that I would say are like proper seed. So they're between $1 and $1.5 million, usually into rounds that are $2 to $4 million. But I like to joke that like seed is a team and a dream. Pre-seed is a team. So one of our most recent investments is in a company down in LA that's in the food automation space. It was very pre-seed. It was a founder that we knew very well from our networks and that we've been tracking for a long time. And he didn't know what he wanted to do yet. Like he was very, very good, a lot of technical talent, a lot of business and startup experience, but didn't have a fully fleshed out, knew what space he wanted to get into, but didn't have a fully fleshed out idea. And that's the kind of person that we want to establish a relationship really early and then help him through that brainstorming phase and help him figure out what his product and product path should be. And that's what I consider pre-seed. And I think hardware is a little bit of a special case because Series A, it's especially if you're doing consumer hardware, which I know it's not the case for you, but like if you're doing consumer hardware, it can take a lot of time and capital to get to shipping product. And I think that a lot of times there's this misconception that you have to ship product to get to a Series A. You have to ship X number of product to get to a Series A. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think that in hardware especially, it's more acceptable to go out and raise a Series A pre-product. You still have to show that you've de-risked several technical aspects of you have to show that the technical challenges that you're dealing with, you've de-risked some of the major ones, and that you have a clear path to production. But I don't think it's a hard requirement that you have to have revenue and you have to have sales and you have to be out in the market to raise a Series A.
Okay, I think this will have to be our last question from the audience.
Just going to ask, why don't VCs standardize the process of investment? Sort of the same line, both of you two have different investment theses. I understand that as an entrepreneur, but VC community isn't a standard process for understanding what deal flow looks like, which is why we always ask the same questions. Everyone always has different answers. It doesn't help us entrepreneurs having to pick and choose what we need to jump over, what hoops we need to jump over to get money from.
So why don't VCs standardize the process?
Why don't entrepreneurs standardize their companies? I mean, really, I guess YC tried to standardize it, right? That's been the most disruptive standardization where they said, here's the deal, and even that deal changes. They don't like to talk about it, but it changes, right? Different companies need different amounts of money, and they need different things from us. And so sometimes it's going to take $200K to meet the next meaningful milestone, and sometimes it's going to take $1.2 million. And so sometimes we write a $200K check, and sometimes we write a $1.2 million check because the company is different and the needs are different. The truth is, this is not a standard business. This shit's hard and it's weird, right? And so I think we do our best to try and be transparent about all of the idiosyncrasies. But in the end, it's like dreamers funding dreamers and trying to build stuff together, trying to do it in a way that's respectful and transparent. And I think if you look at VC today versus where it was 15 years ago, like today, there were no blogs telling you what there was no safe document, right? It would cost you $100,000 to close a round of funding. So if you think it's hard now, like we stand on the shoulders of giants that broke this shit down, you know? So I think that we want to strive to have an easier interface. We want to strive for transparency because we don't want to spend 3 weeks talking to a company that isn't going to end up wanting to take our deal. That's a waste of our time. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot more things like people on panels trying to be transparent about our funding strategy, while also saying that, yeah, we also break the rules because our business isn't standard either. So that's my answer.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think especially at the early stages, like when you're talking about seed and pre-seed, like it's equal parts art and science, or maybe more heavily art than science. It's like you are not investing based on metrics. You're not investing based on traction or spreadsheets or numbers or KPIs or whatever. Like you're really investing on a team and a dream. Like you're investing in the people and their potential to actually execute on what they want to do. So I think that leads to this like huge variation in how different VCs approach it and the processes they have. And like even internal to our firm, like Root Ventures, we have 4 partners, and even internal to Root, every single one of us handles pitching and runs diligence slightly differently. So like there are still some core values that we like to hold really close as a firm, but depending on who you talk to within Root, you might have a slightly different process. And I think that's okay. But the reality of venture capital is that the feedback cycles are so long. Like I invest in a company, I might not know until 5, 7, 10 years later whether or not I made a good bet. So whose process is right and whose process is wrong? I don't know. Ask me again in 10 years.
Yeah, and I just want to throw out there as well, like, I think VCs are great, and the funding models that are out there are wonderful for certain aspects, but it's also not the perfect solution to everything. When you're looking at huge and you want to put your name across the world, that takes millions and millions of dollars and a huge investment. But I also want to look at individuals and small teams with great ideas that want to see this one thing happen. That's not all about a 10-year company vision. Sometimes it's just one thing. And sometimes you hit on that thing so well, it turns into a phenomenal success. But I think there's different approaches for different ideas. They all have their place. And I think you should really keep an open mind and shop around. Like not just shopping around VCs, look around different models. Think about what you really want. And try it out. And it's a long game. I think a lot of great opportunities you see, these people. You've seen them years past. And so getting started, focus on what you love. Focus on what you enjoy doing. Make something and share it. And the rest will follow when you find your groove.
Oh, yeah. So I have like a different company than most companies. Mine's a lifestyle, so it's just like, it's a hobby that makes money, whatever. I'm happy with that. But what's nice about that is it doesn't really have a time, that it's going to die at. Like if I were to take venture capital and like work on this full time, there's a particular point where I have to make a success or quit. Versus just having something that's kind of freewheeling and growing every day as I continue to do it. That doesn't make sense though for every business though. And as Beau said, if you want to like go big and really do something that's going to be transformative for the entire world, it kind of requires lots more funding.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to our panelists. I'm so proud to have all this wisdom on the judging panel for the prize, and I really appreciate you guys being so ready to answer all different questions and things that come up all across the board. It's a really complicated and unique process. So thank you. Can we get a big round of applause for our panelists? And